moving on to the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act, which comes into force this week. It's just been incredible that a piece of legislation which is designed to stop people being targeted in the way that ethnic minorities already are under the Racial Discrimination Act, to widen that out so that people can't be targeted with hate on the basis of their gender, their age, their religion. I mean, that's the kind of the howls of anguish coming out globally. I mean, Liz Truss again has been sort of trotting around all the far right news stations in America, sort of saying, "Oh, this is terrible," and I mean, even comedians like Jonathan Pye have been coming out and going, "Oh, what's going on?" You've got Trevor Phillips last week asking the Scots not to be numpties and to step away from this legislation. I mean, it actually just kind of brings us more into line with the law that's already in place in England. So, Paul, what's going on? And again, what's the media playing at that is being explained so badly?
Yeah, it comes back to the point we made right at the start. We don't have a balanced media in Scotland, and we never will, in terms of where that kind of goes. And this legislation was passed in 2021. It was passed by all the parties apart from the Conservatives. What's been really noticeable is how silent the Lib Dems and how silent the Labour Party have been on this, which again I think says more about them. As you said, and this is the key thing, the legislation is bringing us close to where it already exists in the UK. The legislation was passed in 2021. Here we are when it comes into effect, and we've had crazy reporting in terms of where that again. And again, it's anti-Scottish government. It's not on the facts, and you've seen lawyer after lawyer after lawyer after lawyer coming out and saying these are the facts. This is not what's been reported, and there's been a whole lot of misinformation. And to be honest, it's lazy journalism at best, and that's me being kind in terms of that. But the reporting has been absolutely terrible in that regard, and it does bring us closer, as you said, to where it already exists in the UK, which seems to have, funny enough, not been reported in the press. And it comes back to me about the political discourse in terms of that, what's been created by that push towards right wing politics in the UK. That political discourse comes right across, and it's impacted in Scotland as well in terms of that, just what's acceptable and what's not. And anything in towards equality seems to be, it's identified as a woke culture or whatever. No, this is the policy that's been brought forward for the right reasons, that brings us in line, with the rest of the UK in terms of that, and will be a policy that I think will make a difference. But the reporting has been absolutely terrible on this.
It's been very interesting because there's been a couple of journalists who generally are very unkind to the Scottish Government at every opportunity that I've seen on social media going, seriously, guys, could you please just understand what this is? I mean, even they're kind of shocked by the way in which it's being reported. Professor Tompkins, who was a former Conservative MSP, has come out and said, what are you criticising this legislation for? It's a good piece of legislation. I mean, Francis, down where you are you getting any kind of rumblings about, these terrible Scots? And do you think that perhaps part of the reason this is being picked up on so lazily, as Paul says, by English media, is because in this growing right-wing culture, perhaps they regret having such good legislation on the English statute books?
I think they do. You should remember that there are some groups that are gearing up to attack the Equality Act on some matters, and they're getting a bit of a sympathetic hearing from certain people in the UK government as it stands. So the Scottish government's, the Scottish legislation kind of pushes away from the direction that they wish to take the English legislation in. And they're very, very angry about that. I don't think we should ignore who it is specifically who has complained about this legislation, with the exception of Ali McCoy saying he wanted to have the freedom to abuse Catholics at a Celtic Rangers match, which, frankly, they should have given up a very long time ago, and it's not acceptable, and he knows that perfectly well, so that was just ridiculous. Apart from that, it has all been campaigners against trans rights in England. All of it has been J.K. Rowling and her supporters saying, I'm going to say what I want, I'm going to abuse trans women on the media, social media and so forth, if I want to, and no legislation should stop me. That's essentially what's going on.
I mean, it's very odd. I mean, apart from the fact that it always surprises me that there's always abuse from some quarters about trans women, but nobody ever seems to mention trans men, who have to be one of the, I mean, trans women
Yep.
are vulnerable enough. Trans men have to be one of the most vulnerable sections of our society. I mean, they live in appalling danger of sexual assault and other abuses if they're, but obviously trans women tend to be more noticeable than trans men. But I mean, even not getting into this, the whole debacle specifically about trans people and their right to exist. And you know, obviously they've been around. I mean, the ancient Greeks talked about trans people. I mean, it just wasn't a big deal back then. They didn't even have words for homophobia. You were just a sexual being. You kind of weren't, you know, it was just like, well, people have sex, so what? You know what I mean? Anyway, to move into the whole issue about the hate crime, I mean, why is it that people have got this, you know, if you were to explain it to somebody, well, you know, you can't abuse, you know, there were certain comedians who complained about not being able to abuse black people back in the 1970s. I mean, Paul, looking at this legislation, why is it you've got the likes of Ali McCoy and J.K. Rowling going, well, why can't I? Why are you taking away my right to abuse vulnerable individuals or entire groups of actually, you know, quite a large number of individuals like Roman Catholics? I mean, it's how do we get to the point in a narrative journalistically where people think this
Yeah,
is okay?
I mean, I suppose the ironic thing, you talked around about, you know, the whole debate about trans men and trans women. I remember the debate around about the GRR and the abuse I received in terms of that, and it was horrendous. Was absolutely horrendous in terms. Now I know that was shared with other colleagues. It was horrendous. It was vile. It was absolutely vile in terms of abuse we got that. You know, so the people who are trying sometimes out there trying to defend the right, you know, a woman, the abuse we received from many people was horrendous. I think when it comes back to, and you're right, you remember, and sometimes sometimes watch programs from the 1970s, and racism and misogyny and so was just part of life at that time. And you look back and you're embarrassed by that. And it's so I think we'll be doing the same in terms of this. And when we're looking at how the trans debate is in the next 15, 20 years, we'll be looking back at that and thinking that was horrendous. How we treated these people was horrendous. And you know, when you look at the situation now, you're right. Ali McCoy's coming out and basically just saying, look, it's a tradition. I'm going to be singing anti-Catholic songs. It's just it's disinformation. It's bigoted, and there's no other words around about it. It's just bigoted. It's, you know, it's a simple solution. It's what's there. The reason that we see the press turn around is because it's anti-Scottish government. It's just pure and as simple as that. It's anti-Scottish government. And when you see some of the press, and it comes back to the point, Adam Tompkins, who used to be a Conservative MSP, coming out and actually defending the Scottish government, kind of highlights where we are coming. This is a political attack for politics, no more than that, not in the legislation, because they know they can't come back in the legislation itself, because there are advocates of the legislation right across the chamber. As I said, it comes back to the vote where all three parties, apart from the Tories, voted on it, and a range of professors who've come out and said that the legislation is there for the right reason and it's good legislation. It's purely a political attack, which just shows you the incredibly poor state of the press, the written press in Scotland nowadays. And there is absolutely no wonder that their readership continues to fall and fall and fall and will continue to do so. It doesn't represent the views of people in Scotland.
I mean, it's interesting to see, and it may well come back to kind of, you know, bite them in the bahookie after. But I mean, Labour and the Lib Dems have been showing particular cowardice by not stepping forward and saying, actually, we voted for this because this is the right thing to do. So in some ways, I guess it suits your party, Paul, because those people who have got gay people in their family, or have gay friends or transgender friends. And I have to say, I've had transgender friends since I was 17. And I've, you know, even in the little village 6 miles from me, one of my friends, her daughter is now her son. And this is a story that's happening across Scotland. You know, it's not a new thing. And so most people have got gay people in their family or friends circles, and they may well know somebody who is transgender or is gender non-binary or is Roman Catholic, or I mean, all these, or is old. So surely it's more of these groups of people who are actually going, well, actually, I don't want to be abused. then, I mean, Francis, do you think that there comes a sort of tipping point where people go, well, actually, I know that everyone's going on about this, and they don't want us to like it, but actually this affects me and my family. So, I mean, do you think that there comes a tipping point, Francis, where people can see it for what it is?
Yeah, I do actually, and it's one thing that gives me hope, is that because there are lots of people whose families, whose friends would be potentially affected by essentially a free-for-all in hate speech, saying where people can just say what they like, which appears to be what the far right want, would be personally affected by that. And we should remember also that hate speech can lead to hate crimes, and I don't think any of us want to go there.
Well, sadly, I think you just have to see some of the Old Firm matches, and there's plenty of people you see actually do want to see it go there.
You're right, because I mean, in terms of abuse, I've had two death threats, two viable death threats that I've had to deal with. In terms of, and it did start up as hate speech. It then moved on to hate crime. So I've had two viable death threats. We've seen politicians killed because of this. It's real. This is real, and I think that, for me, we need the legislation. And of course, any legislation requires that balance. I think it's balanced legislation. And I think when you see the role of the press, it has to present it as that. By all means, if they're against the Scottish Government, go and do some proper analysis on it. But you tend not to see in any case, any analysis. You mentioned about the Daily Mail, Daily Express. It's a political position. There's no analysis. And it's as simple as that. And this is where we do need, the role of press does really come in. But as I said, its influence is beginning to wane. But we have to win the hearts and morality people are in about this, because we're doing this for the right reason. And it's bringing us into line with the rest of the UK and in where the rest of Europe is. A political discourse, there is far too much hatred in it at the moment, far too much hatred in it. And, this furore around about the disinformation we're seeing from the press doesn't help it in any way, shape or form at all. And I think sometimes I wish the papers would, the right-wing press would recognise that, and they've got a role to play, but they don't and they won't, which is sad, really sad.